Welcome back to the channel. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and roll your notifications to all so you don't miss any of the demonic content. As we previously noted in the context of this channel, there are ways to view demons that are conspiratorial in nature. So let's talk about what a conspiracy theory is from the perspective of scholarship. Over the course of several videos, I'll be distilling some ideas from Michael Barkun's work, A Culture of Conspiracy, Apocalyptic Visions in Contemporary America, as well as a lot of ideas from the field of epistemology. So let's begin with a seemingly simple question. How do we know when something is true? Or, as I would prefer to phrase it, how do we know when something is knowledge instead of just opinion or belief? To begin to answer that question, we need to think about a field of knowledge called epistemology. Epistemology is basically the study of how we can be said to know a thing. That is, under what conditions can we be said to have a belief or an opinion, and under what other conditions can we have such beliefs or opinions become full-fledged knowing for knowledge. Most basic epistemological proofs contain some variation of the following. So let's break this down. First, we have a proposition. This is the tidbit of information that we want to either confirm is or is not knowledge. Let's use the proposition otters are mammals for the purposes of this video. We also have to acknowledge that we have ways of engaging in inquiry or understanding, that different approaches have different ideas about what constitutes evidence, and that on occasion, these modes of understanding turn out to be incorrect views of the world. For example, legal studies is going to have a very different approach than mathematics to answer questions about the world and to weigh evidence. And while we no longer accept phlogiston as the thing that causes combustion and inhabits otherwise empty space, once upon a time we did. If you're interested in these and other fascinating issues and questions, I would recommend works like Thomas Kuhn's The Structure of Scientific Revolution. Now that we understand these terms a bit, let's run it through the proof. Do I believe that otters are mammals? Well, that's the first hurdle that I need to clear. That is, it doesn't make much sense if I were to say, I know otters are mammals, but I don't believe that they're mammals. So, I've passed the first portion. I do believe otters are mammals. The next part is where we get a bit dicey and challenging. For this part, I have to have adequate justification to be said to have knowledge. By this, I mean that I have to have evidence within the paradigm that justifies my opinion and belief as something that constitutes an actual understanding, as real knowledge. As you can probably imagine, there are a lot of different ways people could suggest that we're justified in our knowledge of something. We could make appeals to reason and logic. We could offer up experimental evidence or point to the works of former luminaries within a particular paradigm, Einstein, for instance. On the level of weak justification requirements, that is one side of a sliding scale, we could say that anyone who watches an episode of Star Trek is justified in their understanding of tachyons, while on the opposite end of things, very strong justification requirements, we could argue that only PhD or MD level researchers themselves can be justified in their knowledge claims, as they're the only ones who actually understand every part of that claim. Let's step away from that for just a second. To me, this points to something important. It points to the idea that knowledge is inherently social. We as human beings are not equipped to ascertain truth in a kind of unmediated way. That is, if someone makes a claim about the world, you probably don't just stare off into the ether until the truth or falsity of this claim arises from the cosmic soup of knowledge. Instead, you probably ask something like, how do you know? And then that person probably makes an appeal to a social body or the product of a social body. For example, I read about it on Twitter, or it was in the last issue of Nature, or it's in the Bible. Now, there are people who disagree with me on this, and they have in some cases good grounds for disagreement. But let's stick with this idea that knowledge is a social product. I think it's going to bear fruit. If knowledge is social, then we have to appeal to a social body, and that social body has to be considered authoritative by a significant amount of people. We can also start to grade the level of knowledge based on the weight of authority we've invested in that social body. For instance, it's better that it comes from the World Health Organization than from your family physician, than from your cousin Joe who knows a thing or two about being healthy. Then we have to have one of the following. P cannot be contradicted by the paradigm. That is, it can't contradict the basic precepts of the method of investigating the world and processing evidence that you're using. With the otters or mammal proposition, we're in the clear. Otters have fur, they give live birth, they nurse their young, they have lungs for breathing, and all the other necessary traits that we need to consider something a mammal. Shifting focus for a moment, though, if groups of chemists say that the world is made of atoms, and I want to say that it's made of cottage cheese, well, I've failed the proof regardless of the evidence I might or might not be able to muster. If, on the other hand, I have fulfilled the criteria so far, and my claim to knowing the world is made of cottage cheese expands the field of chemistry in a productive way, the paradigm might change, and this claim will become foundational to the next paradigm. Now, while Barkun won't necessarily use this approach to explain conspiracy theories, it's notable to me that many of the issues that he sees that define conspiracy theories and their relationship to knowledge suffer from an essential failure at one or more portions of the proof we just looked at. That is, one of the defining elements of conspiracy theories is that conspiracists believe what we might consider to be bad knowledge claims. And as Barkun will suggest, for the purpose of supporting, quote, the belief that an organization made up of individuals or groups was or is acting covertly to achieve some malevolent end, end quote. We'll talk about the specific form those bad knowledge claims take in the next video.